Once upon a time, there lived a beautiful couple who loved each other in a way that made people jealous. Their names were Cooney and Shade, and from the very first day they met, it felt as though the world had finally made sense. They laughed easily, dreamed loudly, and spoke of forever, like two people who believed that love alone was enough to defeat life. They met in a small gathering, exchanged numbers, and within weeks, everyone around them knew it was serious. They prayed together, dreamed together, and planned a future that sounded too good to be true. However, when the topic of marriage came up, there was only one shadow hanging over their joy: the fact that they were both and not medically compatible. Cooley and Shaji ran some tests and realized that their dreams of ever being together was now hanging on a thread. The nurse revealed to them that they had a 25% chance in each pregnancy that the child would have CLE cell anemia. This was a 1 in 4 chance, and Kunle looked at Shadi and promised that this was not going to be their case. If you decide to have only one child, I assure you that the child would not have the disease. Cooney said to Shadi, who was still trying to process what she had just heard. Shadi had always dreaded this day in her life, a day when she would finally fall in love with a man who was also a carrier. She sat there speechless as Cooley tried to convince her not to leave him. Her mind spun like a carousel as she thought deeply about what the nurse had said, her heart pounding in her chest as she tried to imagine a life without Clayet. The thought terrified her greatly as she hugged him tightly and assured him that she was not willing to quit on them. The nurse, who was still standing in the corner, chipped in as she advised them to make the right decision. People should think, well, she said, care as have a high chance of having children with SS. Coley squeezed Chad's hand as he smiled and assured her that their only child would not have the disease. Shad nodded like someone who was trying so hard to believe despite her doubts. They left the hospital positive that God would never allow such to happen to them. Days later, when the news reached their families, their parents could not believe what they had heard. They heard that they decided to proceed with the marriage, despite the huge revelation that was meant to tear them apart. Kunle's mother sat him down as she tried to speak some sense into him. "My son," she said slowly, "love is good though, but suffering is not romantic. There are so many girls out there who are compatible with you. Why choose to bring suffering upon yourself now? All because of a love that might not even withstand the pressures of the years ahead." She said to Coley, who tried to convince her that Shad and himself had decided to have only one child, "Did not say we have a 25% chance, and I'm banking on that to sustain us, since we are reducing our risk by having only one child." Cole's mother did everything to stop him, but Cole was not willing to listen to all that she had to say. Shade, on the other hand, sat across from my elder brother, who saw her through school since their parents died. He begged her with tears in his eyes as Shadi stood her ground, revealing that Cole was the only man for her. "Do you know what SS means?" he said to Shadi angrily as he tried to change her mind. "Do you know what this crisis entails? Pain, hospital, blood transfusions," he told Shadi, who revealed to him that they only planned on having one child. Shadi narrated all the nurse had said to her, but her brother was too worried to believe that their only child would escape the disease. "You both only have a 25% chance. What happens to the remaining 75? The margin is too high for something as sensitive as this. You're going to bring a small human into this world. So, you need to consider him or her and the chances of the child being an SS." Tai tried to convince Shadi to marry Basun instead. They had known Basun right from when they were young, and Basun always had an eye for Shadi. He even approached Ta to plead with him to talk to his sister Shade, but Shadi refused without hesitation. She told her brother that Basun was just like a brother to her, and a relationship between them would feel so strange and awkward, seeing that she was even older than him by a month. Tio shook his head in defeat as all efforts to change her mind proved abortive. Tio decided in that moment to try another tactics. He made up his mind to speak to Cole directly, hoping that Cole would be more understanding to his plight. So Tio set up a meeting with Coley, who arrived confident with a smile on his face. Tio did not waste any time. "Coley," he said calmly, "I'm not against love. I'm against avoidable suffering." Cole leaned back on the chair as he crossed his legs and began to speak. "Brother Tao, I respect you," he replied, "but I think you're overthinking this. I am not overthinking anything, Cully. This is science. This is blood. This is a child that has no voice yet. Coley smiled. The kind of smile that stubborn men wear when they have already made up their minds. We have agreed to only have one child, he said again. One child, one chance, and I believe God will cover us. Thus shook his head slowly as he stared at him. Faith is not gambling. Cool eye, he said quietly. You don't put a child on a roulette table and call it belief. Kunle's smile faded as he asked what he meant by that. So what are you trying to say? He asked as Style advised him to walk away. If you truly love my sister, let her go because love does not insist on its own way. Cole stood up angrily as he began to yell. With all due respect, I'm not leaving Shad for any other man. I am marrying her and nothing you or anyone will say would change our minds, he said as he walked away angrily determined to marry Shadi even if it was the last thing that he did. Tao, seeing how Adam and the both were on being together, had no other option but to bless their marriage. However, he made it clear to his sister that he will not get involved if things turn S, knowing how hard he tried to prevent it. That was the end of the conversation for them as Shadi finally got married to Kohi. Despite all the warnings and objections they faced, the first few years of their marriage was filled with so much happiness as the both of them lived peacefully and happily. They traveled, laughed, built careers, and enjoyed the quiet joy of companionship. Their home was peaceful. Their love felt validated. Sometimes Sure will remember the genotype discussion and feel a pinch of fear, but Clay had a way of reassuring her that all will be well. Let's enjoy our marriage and not bother ourselves about children, he said as they decided not to have a child until after 5 years. Years passed, and the 5 years went by before their eyes. They sat down together like adults and revisited the conversation that they buried for all these years. One child, Shell said softly to her husband, who agreed and assured her that all would be well. So they prayed, fasted, and convinced themselves again that they were doing the right thing. And then Sade got pregnant with child. The pregnancy went by so smoothly as Cole cared for her with all that he had. He was so attentive and loving to her that Shade could not help but thank God for giving her a man like Coley. Shade prayed every night, placing her hands on her belly as she whispered to God to help them. Please, God, please let my child be healthy, she said repeatedly as peace settled in her heart. Finally, she gave birth to a bouncing baby boy who they named Damola, which means that God has blessed them with wealth. They were both excited to see how healthy their baby was. They could not believe that God answered their prayers in the most beautiful way. Everything seemed fine until one night when Damola cried in a way that froze Shad's heart. This was not a cry of hunger or discomfort. It was a cry that Shade could not comprehend. Everything she tried to do to comfort him failed as the child continued to cry for hours without end. They finally rushed him to the hospital, and the doctors revealed to them that the child was SS. The entire room fell silent as Shadi stared at the paper until the letters began to blur. Cole felt something break inside his chest as he realized that their only child was a sickler. Their carefully calculated risk, their fade-back decision had turned into their worst nightmare. Their lives changed within a twinkle of an eye, from a happy home to a place where sadness sat at the center of everything that was happening. They watched as their son battled with a disease that their single decision could have averted. The love that they believed could withstand anything that life would throw at them began to dwindle as Cohen spent more time away from home as he began to pursue more exciting adventures with other women. Shade stayed home with their son, regretting her decision as she had no one else to turn to. She watched her son cry restlessly, awake, unable to catch any sleep. Shadi stayed awake all night as her husband moved from one club to another with different women. His sudden change made her wonder if her husband ever loved her to start with. Each day that passed came with its own struggle as she found herself lost in a life that she no longer recognized. Coley stopped coming home early as he spent more time with other women who he believed brought joy to his life. As the months went by, he even stopped coming home at all. Whenever he decided to show up, it was with the smell of alcohol and excuses that no longer bothered to sound believable. Coley spoke less to Shadi and barely looked at his son Damola. It was as though the sight of him reminded Cole of a decision that he wanted to forget. One night after another long argument, Cole packed up his bag and decided to leave. "I can't continue like this," he said flatly as he revealed to Shadi that he needed a break from all this suffering. "My life has become unrecognizable, and I can't stand it anymore. I need peace." Coley added as though peace was something that he could chase without consequences. And just like that, he left Shade all alone with their son. Coley did not call to check up on them. He kept away, and Shadi had no other option but to carry the weight alone. Who was she to leave their son for at this critical time of his life? Shade in that moment understood why mothers were more celebrated than fathers in the world. She saw firsthand what a mother's love looked like, and Shade could not help but break down in tears. She stayed even when things looked hard and the light at the end of the tunnel looked non-existent. She decided to pay her brother a visit. Seeing how difficult it had been for her to pay his hospital bills, Shadi arrived at her brother's house that evening, looking like a shadow of the woman that she once was. Her eyes were sunken and her shoulders slumped as her brother opened his door and froze in complete shock. For a long moment, neither of them uttered a word. Then Shadi broke into tears as she cried from the deepest part of her heart. Shadi cried the kind of cry that comes from years of holding on. She cried for the marriage she lost, the husband who walked away, and the child whose pain never seemed to end. Tao held her quietly as he assured her that all would be well. He had seen this play out over and over again and wished they listened to him when he advised her not to marry Kul. "I don't know what else to do," she said to Klee, who listened to all that she had to say. Tio did not say, "I told you so." Not because he hadn't warned her, but because he could see that life had already said it louder than he ever could. So, he promised to help with money and to assist her with hospital bills. However, when Shur asked if she could move in with him temporarily, his face fell as he revealed to her that his wife was pregnant. "She's not strong enough for this kind of pressure," he said to his sister as she nodded her head slowly, knowing that her demands were not his to grant. So she thanked him and left, happy that her son's bill were at least sorted. Life became a long corridor of hospital WS and prayer rooms. Years then passed quietly as Damola grew older. The crisis did not stop, as they even became more frequent than she had anticipated. Some days were calm whilst others were unbearable. Shadi learned how to retest results. She learned how to negotiate bills, and even how to smile through her exhaustion. One evening after another long day at the hospital, Shadi felt empty in a way that she had never felt before. Crying had become her second skin, as she could not stand to see her son in any more pain. That evening, Shadi sat beside her son's hospital bed, watching his chest rise and fall as he groaned in pain. His face was pale as Shadi held a small hand in hers and cried out to God to save her son. She began to pray in a way that she had never prayed before. Shade cried out to God with a broken voice. She reminded him of his stripes on the cross that brings healing to those that were sick. "God, please," she whispered. "I have heard testimonies. I have heard that genotypes can change. Please let my son be one of those stories." Shade said this prayer for hours. She prayed until her truth burned as tears soaked the sheets that her son laid weakly. However, instead of improving, Dula's condition began to worsen. His breathing became shallow as his body trembled repeatedly. Shadi felt hope slip through her fingers. She could not sit back and watch her son die as her heart broke to see him in such a pain. That night something dangerous settled in her heart. Shadi felt tired of being strong. She felt tired of fighting alone, waking up each morning only to watch her child suffer from the consequences of her decisions. So Shadi kissed her son's forehead gently as she whispered words of apology. She walked out of the hospital broken as she found her way to the nearby bridge. For the first time in years, Shadi felt a calmness that terrified her to her bones. She could not stand life any longer and wanted to end it so as to feel peace once again. As she stepped forward, ready to climb the bridge, a voice spoke behind her, telling her to stop. "Please don't do it," the voice said as Shade turned towards the voice in shock. A young, handsome man stood there as he smiled at time began to speak. Shadi had never seen him before. His voice was calm, steady, filled with authority that made her freeze in her tracks. "You are a mother," he said gently, "and your son will leave." Shad shook her head in disbelief. The man looked at her, and said something that sent chills down her spine. "Your son will be a medical doctor in the future. Always guide him to do the right thing, or else a worse fate will befall him." Sade laughed bitterly through her tears. "Have you seen him?" she asked. "Do you know what is battling?" The man handed her a sealed bottle of water. "Go back to the hospital," he said. "Let him drink this water. Use it to clean his body, and all will be well." Before she could ask his name, before she could say another word, the man was gone. Shade stood alone on the bridge, trembling as she clutched the bottle to her chest. Immediately, she ran back to the hospital, her hand shaking, and she did exactly what the man had told her to do. That night, Dame Lola slept peacefully for the very first time. He did not groan in pain or cry out for her to save him. The doctors were all amazed to see her son in the best of health. A new test was now carried out on him that revealed that his genotype had changed. This was the first time that something like this was happening in their hospital, as they tried to wrap their heads around what could have happened. Whilst they called this impossible, Shade they boldly revealed to them that nothing was impossible with God. In fact, she told them how the man on the bridge, how he appeared out of nowhere, spoke with certainty, and vanished like mist. Some doctors listened politely. Others dismissed it as grief-induced imagination, but none of them could deny the evidence that was staring back at them from the lab results. From that day on, Dame Mola never felt sick again, not even for once. The hospital visit ended. The midnight cries disappeared, and the pain that once defined his childhood vanished like it had never existed. Dyla grew into a strong and lively boy. He ran, laughed, played football on the streets like other children, and for the first time in her life, she slept through the night without any atom of fear. She watched her son closely, waiting for the sickness to return. But to her greatest surprise, it never did. Years passed, and Dame Lola grew curious about hospitals and diseases. Not out of fear, but a kind of fascination that fled his passion. He asked questions about injections, stared at doctors with admiration, and told his mother one day that he wanted to be a medical doctor. Shade stood there frozen as she remembered the words of the man from the bridge. She raised him into a very respectable and hard-working young man. Shade reminded him often that life was not as ordinary as people made it seem. She informed him that his life was preserved for a very good reason, and that in whatever he does, he should always be kind and considerate towards others. Years passed, and Damola finally became a medical doctor. Shadi could not hold back her tears as she watched her son, who at one time could not come down from his sick bed, was now standing in front of everyone ready to save lives. Shah remembered the prophecy as she thanked God once again for preserving his life. Years into his medical career, Dola worked in the same kind of hospital that once held his childhood pain. However, none of what he experienced at the hospital frightened him. Instead, it grounded him as every patient reminded him of a life that could be saved. One afternoon, an emergency case was rushed into the hospital. A woman ran behind the stretcher, screaming and crying as she clutched her son's hand. Nurses pushed him into the emergency ward as his mother cried out for them to save him. Dabala stepped forward immediately as he caught sight of a boy who was now groaning in pain as his limbs were stiff with agony. The boy was SS, and Dabala could not help but remember the pain that he once went through. He spoke gently to the boy, reassuring him as the nurses got straight to work. "You'll be fine," he said to the boy, whose face was contorted in pain as he cried out to him for help. Kunle could not help but notice the boy's mother, who was crying in the corner. The sight brought back so many memories as Damola made up his mind to help the boy. However, as he attended to the boy, the door opened as a man rushed in to meet with him. "Doctor, please, that's my son," he said urgently as Damola looked up and froze. The face before him was older, thinner, worn by regrets and years. But it was a face he knew too well from old photographs in his mother's box from the man whose absence had shaped his childhood. His own very father Kul, who abandoned him and never came back. Damola's hands trembled as he excused himself briefly and stepped outside, his chest tightening as he pulled out his phone and called his mother. "Mama," he said as his voice shook with rage and disbelief. "He's here, Mama," he said to Shadi, who remained silent. "It's him," Dola continued, revealing that his father's son was SS. There was a pause on the line as Shadi began to speak so softly. "My son, please help the child. I know how hard this can be, especially for you. But I beg you in the name of God, don't bring a strange rat upon yourself by ignoring them. Show your father that you are far better than the man that he was." "Mommy, I don't understand you. How can you tell me to save his son?" He snapped. "This is the same man who abandoned us, who left you to suffer, who never asked if I was dead or alive." "I understand," Shur replied gently. "But remember the bridge. Remember what you are told. Save him, not because he deserves it, but because you are not him." Damola closed his eyes as he remembered the night his mother cried, the hunger, the hospitals, the prayers. So he took a deep breath and went back inside where Kul was facing the room anxiously. When Damola approached him, Kul looked up with desperation in his eyes. "Doctor, please," Kul said. "My son, I can't lose him." Damola looked at him steadily. "My name is Damola," he said calmly as Kul nodded distracted and pleaded with him to save his son. Damola looked right at him and revealed that he was his son as well. The entire room fell silent as Kyun stared at him as though he was seeing a ghost. "No," he whispered. "That's not possible, Damola. He was sick now. He wouldn't have survived." Damola looked at him with disgust as he revealed to him that he truly survived. "I did that," Damola replied quietly. "I lived when everyone believed that I was going to die, so I became a doctor." Kunle's legs gave way as he sank into the chair in regret to see how his life had turned out. Kunle left Shadi at her most vulnerable state. He went after another woman who lied to him that she was AA. Kul had no idea that the woman had lied until history decided to repeat itself in the most shocking way ever. Damola looked at the boy on the bed as he stared at his father, who could not believe how fate had chosen to repay him for all that he did. He watched in pain as Damola took care of his son, who he thought would be a breath of fresh air after abandoning Damola's mother all those years ago. Ko regretted his actions as he wished that he could turn back the hands of time. He learned his lessons the hard way, that you don't run away from your problems when things gets hard. He learned that patience was a virtue and abandoning responsibility does not reset life, but instead he reshuffles the same pain into a new chapter. Shadi lived a very fulfilling life as Damola took care of her. She turned her pain into advocacy, and she began to speak openly about genotype awareness, sharing her story to others who would not repeat the same mistakes that she made. Although Kul finally begged for their forgiveness, they forgave him without returning to what had already broken, choosing peace, wisdom, and a future shaped by hard lessons rather than reopening a past that taught them why some doors are better left closed. The lessons we learn from this story is that love alone is not enough to build a safe future. Wisdom, responsibility, and truth must work beside it. Faith should never be used to gamble with innocent lives, and decisions made in pride often return with heavier consequences. Running away from responsibility does not cancel the pain. It transfers it to others, and wait patiently to return. This story reminds us that choices made today can shape generations, that parents must think beyond themselves, and that while God is merciful, life still demands accountability. True love protects. True faith plants, and true character is revealed not when things are easy, but when staying is harder than leaving. I hope you won.